definite major purpose, activated by a driving motive, is the starting point of all worthwhile achievement. Criticizing without destroying enthusiasm. Sometimes it will be necessary to criticize members of your mastermind alliance or the people working for you who are not carrying their share of the load. You can do this without destroying their enthusiasm if you use a careful process. You must lead your black sheep to admit their mistakes on their own. Here's an example of that process taught me by Andrew Carnegie. My personal secretary was a young man who had been with me several years. He was efficient, dependable, and had a pleasing personality. He became associated with a group of people who had had the bad habit of getting their enthusiasm out of a whiskey bottle. First thing I knew, he began to show up late on Monday mornings. Then he became irritable, and I knew the time had come for me to do a little friendly analysis on his behalf. So I prepared the way by inviting him to my home for dinner. During the meal, we chatted pleasantly about everything except the subject I had in mind discussing with him. After dinner, we went to the library and lighted our cigars. The stage was then set, so I began by asking him a few questions. First, I asked him if he believed a man who was a regular drinker should be considered for a promotion, and he replied that he thought not. Then I asked him what he would do if he had in his employ a man so addicted to drink that he could not get to work on time, and he replied that he would probably fire him. By this time he had begun to squirm in his chair, and I waited a while to give him the chance to do some serious thinking. Then I asked him if he thought it might be possible for a sensible man to change his habits in time to save himself from ruin. He waited for a couple of minutes before answering, then straightened up, looked me squarely in the eyes, and said, "You needn't go any further. I have known for a long time that this hour was coming, and I deeply appreciate your kindness in making it as easy as possible. All I can say is that I have been a fool, but I can change. I will do so if you bear with me long enough to let me prove it." So he was disciplined, but it was with self-discipline. He took hold of his job with renewed enthusiasm and promoted himself from one position to another until he became manager of one of our largest steel plants. You can see the value and importance of this kind of approach. If Carnegie had angrily confronted this man, no doubt the fellow would have been so ashamed he would have denied any problem. Carnegie would have lost a valuable employee, and the man would have been driven only deeper into his destructive habits. Instead, both men came out ahead. Respect and nurture the enthusiasm others have. It can overcome powerful problems, and from those problems it will extract benefits beyond your imagination. Enthusiasm changes lives. Another person's enthusiasm was what set me moving toward the success I have attained. That person was my stepmother. I was 9 years old when she entered our home. We lived in poverty in rural Virginia. She had come from better circumstances, and she would not accept our circumstances without protest. My father introduced me to her with these words, "I would like you to meet the fellow who is distinguished for being the worst boy in this county, and will probably start throwing rocks at you no later than tomorrow morning." My stepmother walked over to me, tilted my head upward, and looked me right in the eye. Then she looked at my father and replied, "You are wrong. This is not the worst boy in the county, but the smartest one, who hasn't yet found an outlet for his enthusiasm." That statement began a friendship between us which was destined to produce these 17 principles of success and to carry their influence around the world. No one had ever called me smart. My family and neighbors had built me up in my own mind as being a bad boy. I had done nothing to disappoint them. My stepmother, in one brief statement, changed all that. She changed many things. She persuaded my father to go to dental school, from which he was graduated with honors. She moved our family into the county seat, where my father's practice could flourish and my brothers and I could be better educated. My father resisted these efforts at first, but her enthusiasm always won him over. When I turned 14, she bought me a second-hand typewriter and told me that she believed I could become a writer. I knew her enthusiasm, I relished it, and I saw how it had already improved our lives. I accepted her belief, began to write for local newspapers. I was doing the same kind of writing that fateful day I went to interview Andrew Carnegie and received the charge that became my life's work. My stepmother's enthusiasm had not just put me in a position to grasp such an opportunity, but given me the self-confidence and enthusiasm of my own to succeed at it. I wasn't the only benefactor. My father became the most prosperous man in town. My brothers and stepbrothers became a physician, a dentist, a lawyer, and a college president. What power enthusiasm has! When that power is released to support definiteness of purpose and is constantly renewed by faith, it becomes an irresistible force for which poverty and temporary defeat are no match. You can communicate that power to anyone who needs it. This is probably the greatest work you can do with your enthusiasm. Excite the imaginations of others, inspire their creative vision, help them connect with infinite intelligence. Building, demonstrating, and sharing enthusiasm are a perfect manifestation of the moral principles behind the science of success. When you deliver your work with enthusiasm, you are already going the extra mile. Earlier chapters have placed heavy emphasis on the importance of taking control of your mind. This control is pivotal to your personal initiative, your positive mental attitude, and controlled enthusiasm. Self-discipline is the process that ties all these efforts together for you. It isn't possible to achieve self-discipline without making some progress on those other principles. Self-discipline requires self-knowledge and an accurate assessment of your current abilities. Likewise, the other principles can't really be put into action without self-discipline. It is the channel through which all your personal power for success must flow. Think of your mind as a reservoir in which you have been storing up potential power. You will now learn to release that power in precise quantities and specific directions. This is the essence of self-discipline. Controlling your emotions. Most people act first and think about the consequences later. Self-discipline will reverse that process. You will learn to think before you act. The primary means to this end is your control of your emotions. For review, the 14 major emotions are repeated below. Positive emotions. 1. Love. 2. Sex. 3. Hope. 4. Faith. 5. Enthusiasm. 6. Loyalty. 7. Desire. Negative emotions. 1. Fear. 2. Jealousy. 3. Hatred. 4. Revenge. 5. Greed. 6. Anger. 7. Superstition. All these emotions are states of mind and are thus subject to your control. You can see right away how dangerous the negative emotions can be if they're not mastered. The positive emotions can also be destructive if you do not organize and release them with conscious control. Inherent in these emotions is explosive power. If you regulate that power properly, it can lift you to the heights of achievement. But if you let it run wild, it can dash you to pieces on the rocks of failure. You learned in earlier chapters that a definite major purpose, activated by a driving motive, is the starting point of all worthwhile achievement. This motive must be so strong that it will subordinate all your thoughts and efforts to the attainment of your definite purpose. But your drive, your emotions, must also be subject to your own good judgment, so that your enthusiasm and desire will not run over your wisdom. In other words, you must discipline yourself so that your drive is always under control and directed in the proper channels. Self-discipline calls for balancing your emotions with your reasoning. This means you must learn to consult both your feelings and your reason before you reach any decision. Sometimes you will need to set aside your emotions and follow the dictates of reason alone. Other times you will decide in favor of your emotions, modified by your reason. A happy medium is important. Consider, for example, those people who are so in love that they will do anything for their beloveds. They are putty in the hands of others. They rarely amount to anything because they have no purposes of their own in life. You might wonder if this danger means that it would be safer and wiser to control your life strictly on the basis of reason and leave emotion out of every decision. The answer is an emphatic no. Don't forget, your emotions provide your driving power, the activating force which enables you to put your decisions into action. If you destroyed hope and faith, what would there be to live for? If you killed enthusiasm, loyalty, and desire, but still retained reason, what good would reason be? It would still be there to provide direction, but what would it direct? You must control and direct your emotions, not abolish them. Besides, abolition would be an impossible task. Emotions are like a river. Their power can be dammed up and released under control and direction, but it cannot be held forever in check. Sooner or later the dam will burst, unleashing catastrophic destruction. Your negative emotions can also be controlled and directed. PMA and self-discipline can remove their harmful effects and make them serve constructive purposes. Sometimes fear and anger will inspire intense action, but you must always submit your negative emotions and your positive ones to the examination of your reason before releasing them. Emotion without reason is a dreadful enemy. What faculty provides the crucial balance between emotion and reason? It is your willpower, or ego, a subject which will be explored in more detail below. Self-discipline will teach you to throw your willpower behind either reason or emotion and amplify the intensity of their expression. Both your heart and your mind need a master, and they can find that master in your ego. However, your ego will fill this role only if you use self-discipline. In the absence of self-discipline, your mind and heart will fight their battles as they please. In this situation, the person within whose mind the fight is carried out often gets badly hurt. The Big Four. Your self-discipline will not only control your emotions and balance your reason, but also be incredibly useful in four highly important areas. Appetite. Too much food, drink, and other outside influences, such as drugs, which are bad for your body, can shorten your life, sap your energy, and distract you from the work at hand. It isn't necessary to moralize on these points. The empirical effects of not being in control of your appetite are sufficient cause for you to subject your appetites to self-discipline. Positive mental attitude. PMA is the only frame of mind in which you can have definiteness of purpose. Through it, you can induce others to cooperate with you and help you. It can also attract the power of infinite intelligence by applying your faith. Self-discipline ensures that you use your mental attitude to attract the things you want and to repel the things that threaten you. Time. There's an old saying, wasting time is sinful. Most people waste enough time in gossip alone to earn them all the luxuries they envy in others. Time is your most precious asset. If used correctly, it is like money in the bank. You must spend it under strict self-discipline. One of the easiest ways to do this is to schedule your time use for the next 24 hours and stick to that chart. Do it once, and it will be easier the next time. Alexander Solzhenitsyn is another example of someone whose self-discipline allowed him to have an enormous impact. Not only did he survive years in Soviet gulags and then dare to write about it, he kept to a rigorous schedule of writing even after being exiled to the United States. Though he was an international celebrity and could have spent the rest of his life basking in attention, Solzhenitsyn moved to a small town in Vermont so he could find solitude. Until he returned to Russia to participate in the reform of the country, he would get up at 6 and begin to write after eating a small breakfast. He would stop for a short lunch, then begin writing again, often until late in the evening, and sometimes until the sun rose again. He didn't allow the telephone to interrupt his work, and he rarely even left home. The result was a series of novels called The Red Wheel, a historical epic of tremendous importance. Even when history finally caught up with his Soviet oppressors, Solzhenitsyn resisted the urge to rush back to Moscow because he knew he had to finish his work. He didn't let countless opportunities to appear on news programs, which would have gained publicity for his books and made money, distract him from the job at hand. His self-discipline, honed through his years in the gulags, allowed him to finish what he had started and made him a powerful figure when the Soviet Empire finally collapsed. Definiteness of purpose. The importance of definiteness of purpose had better be clear to you by now. You know that it is the beginning of all achievements when it is tied to a strong, compelling motive. If you haven't yet made up your mind about your definite purpose, go back to the first chapter and write out your major objective in life and your plans for attaining it. This is the first step in self-discipline. Even infinite intelligence can't help you get where you're going if you haven't made up your mind about exactly where you want to go. There's an old joke about a preacher who was stranded on the roof of his church in the flood. As the waters rose higher around him, he prayed fervently for God to rescue him. The Lord will provide, he told himself. Soon a boat floated by. The occupants called to the preacher to swim to them. Don't worry about me, the preacher called back. The Lord will provide. Reluctantly, the people on the boat went on. The waters rose higher and soon were lapping around the knees of the man of God. Another boat appeared within a few yards of the church rooftop. Rescuers inside called to the preacher, and again he replied, "The Lord will provide." This boat went on, and the preacher prayed even more fervently. Just as the water reached the preacher's chin, a third boat appeared. It came so close that the preacher could have jumped right on. But the terrified man clutched his steeple and cried, "Save someone else! The Lord will provide for me!" And the boat went on. Within a few minutes the water closed over the preacher's head, and he drowned. Reaching the gates of heaven, he asked for an immediate audience with the Lord, which was granted. In the divine presence, the preacher humbled himself and asked, "Heavenly Father, my work on earth was not yet finished. Why didn't you save me?" "Good grief," came the reply. "I thought you wanted to come here. I sent you 3 boats, didn't I?" Self-discipline makes you jump when your boat comes by. The power of self-discipline. When you speak of power, you usually think of a Rockefeller or a Trump, somebody with money or property. But one of the most powerful men who ever lived had neither. Mahatma Gandhi didn't own a house, he had no money, but his influence eclipses that of any other person of this century. That's an outstanding statement until you look at it and analyze the source of Gandhi's power. Here was a man who over long years, step by step, defeated the British Empire. He wrested freedom for India from the British by using a power His Majesty's government didn't understand. There were 5 sources to his power. Definiteness of purpose. Gandhi's purpose was to free the people of India. He knew precisely what he wanted, what his major aim in life was, and he was determined that nothing would defeat him. Going the extra mile. No one asked Gandhi to spend his life as he did. No one paid him to do so. He did not have a selfish purpose. He did not think in terms of personal reward. He went not only the extra mile, but millions of extra miles, because he was planning to benefit the 400 million people living in his country. No wonder he had power. Applied faith. Gandhi completely cleared his mind of any doubt that he would eventually win the freedom he desired for his people. He kept his mind securely fixed on his definite major purpose, and this resolute purpose and his persistent action to achieve it opened his mind to the power of infinite intelligence. Mastermind. Gandhi assembled what is probably the greatest mastermind alliance in human history. It consisted of hundreds of millions of minds. Many of these minds may have been lacking in formal education. Each had the capacity for faith and a burning desire to achieve the goal of freedom Gandhi was leading it toward. No power in the world could have defeated such a powerful mastermind alliance, except an even larger one. Self-discipline. How do you suppose Gandhi managed to keep his mind focused on one definite major purpose all those years? He must have had many opportunities to capitalize on his situation or to use his power for his personal benefit. Anyone who had the power Gandhi had might have been tempted by such opportunities. But he had the self-discipline to lead a simple life, and thus he had the self-discipline to free a nation. The structure of your mind. Your mind is divided into 6 departments, which are subject to your conscious control. Understanding these departments help you understand self-discipline. The 6 departments are: 1. The ego, the source of willpower. It acts as a supreme court with the power to reverse, modify, change, or eliminate the entire work of all the other departments. 2. Emotions. Here is generated the driving force which sets your thoughts, plans, and purposes into action. 3. Reason. This is where you weigh, eliminate, and properly evaluate the products of your imagination and emotions. 4. Imagination. This is where you create ideas, plans, and methods of attaining your desired ends. 5. Conscience. Here you test the moral justice of your thoughts, plans, and purposes. 6. The memory. This acts as the keeper of records of all your experiences and as a storehouse for all sense perceptions and inspiration from infinite intelligence. The ego. The ego, seat of your willpower, is the most valuable thing your body possesses. The rest of you is a collection of chemicals which on the open market aren't worth the price of dinner in a decent restaurant. You must control and discipline this priceless part of yourself. It can stand for anything you value, from poverty and ill health to your brightest ambitions. Some egos are weak and lacking in courage. Some are overinflated. Neither kind amounts to anything. But most people struggle with weak ones. Don't let a weak ego hold you back. A prosperous man I knew suffered a defeat in business and ended up driving a taxicab for a few $100s a week. There's nothing wrong with driving a taxicab, but it isn't the right kind of employment for someone who was making 6 figures. That man needed to bolster his ego so he could return to success. One woman I know wore a huge diamond ring on her finger. That ring was a symbol of her success, not a sign of vanity or ostentation. Once she had been poor, but with that ring on her finger, she constantly reminded her ego that her poverty was of the past. She fed her ego with images that strengthened it. This is just what you must do with your ego. It may not require something as visible and expensive as a diamond ring, but it requires sustenance. Always treat your ego as your most precious possession, and protect it as if it were a diamond. You certainly wouldn't leave a diamond around for anyone to pick up, yet most people leave their egos wide open for anyone to come in and pollute with thoughts of fear and worry. Don't let others know your secret thoughts, and don't let them unload their burdens on you. You can't afford to have worries of your own, let alone carry around someone else's. You need a technique to protect your inner self, your ego, from the damaging effects of negative ideas. There are 3 walls to build around your ego. The outermost wall is just high enough to keep out people who have no business getting in to take up your time. This wall should have several doors, and if someone can establish a reasonable right to your time, let that person in. But make sure he or she establishes that right first. The middle wall is much taller, and it has a single door you must watch closely. You should admit only a few people, the ones who have established the fact that they have something you want or something in common which will be mutually helpful. The third and innermost wall is so tall that no one will ever scale it. It has no doors. You should not allow anyone inside that wall because it protects your ego. If you let people wander in, they will wander back out with things you cherish, leaving behind worry and anxiety. Build this wall around your ego. Make a place where you can retire by yourself and communicate with infinite intelligence. Emotions. Earlier in this chapter, we talked about the need for balancing your emotions with the faculty of reason. Here we will look at a different aspect of the emotions. Consider for a moment the serious problems which can arise in your mind when old disappointments and failures surface again and again in your emotions. Self-discipline is the only real solution to such problems. It begins with the recognition that there are only two kinds of problems: those you can solve and those you can't. Problems that can be solved should immediately be dealt with by the most practical means available. This is why you were told in an earlier chapter to make amends for old wrongs you may have done. Problems which can't be solved should be put out of your mind and forgotten. Think of this forgetting as closing the door on whatever it is that disturbs your emotional equilibrium. Self-discipline allows you to close this door and lock it securely, instead of standing in the door and looking wistfully back at what might have been. Look forward instead into the future. One method is to visualize some symbol of the unsolvable problem floating deep in space. Imagine a giant envelope opening next to that symbol and the symbol sliding gently into that envelope. Let the envelope close and then watch it drift away into the void. Whether you close a door or dispatch an envelope, you are employing a valuable technique. It requires a good, strong will, and repeated practice of this process only strengthens your will. Door closing does not make you hard, cold, or unemotional, but it does require firmness. Self-discipline cannot permit lurking memories, and you cannot waste time worrying over the unsolvable. Doing so destroys your creative force, undermines your initiative, disturbs your faculty of reason, and just plain confuses all the departments of your mind. Closing the door on fear and worry allows you to open the doors of hope and faith. Reason. If your ego functions as a supreme court, your reason functions as a superior court, handling the more routine functions of judgment. It evaluates the creations of the imagination, modifies the expression of the emotions, and ratifies the decisions of the conscience. You train your rational faculties by observation, study, and analysis of truth. Imagination. Your imagination is responsible for all creative effort. New ideas are assembled here, and you must allow your reason to control its activities carefully. Keep your imagination workshop focused on things related to your definite major purpose, not on fantasies about winning the lottery. Because imagination is responsible for creating everything new in the world, it is an invaluable tool for your progress along the path to success. Conscience. Your conscience keeps an eye on the moral justice of all your thoughts and deeds. If you always consult it and heed its advice, it will repay you by keeping you honorable and esteemed by others. If you ignore its advice, be careful. At the least, you will alienate the members of your mastermind alliance, cut yourself off from the power of infinite intelligence, and be plagued by countless fears. At the worst, you will discover that society has built many special rooms for people who don't obey their consciences. The view from these rooms is usually obstructed by bars. The memory. Here you store all the impressions of both your conscious and subconscious minds. Self-discipline will allow you to keep unpleasant memories tucked away after you have learned the lessons those memories inspire. Many positive things may also be stored in your memory, ready to be called forth upon demand by a willpower strengthened by self-discipline. Your self-discipline is the procedure you use to coordinate these departments of your mind and keep each of them under control. Its most immediate effect is the mental harmony you need to focus all your efforts towards success. The things you cannot discipline. There are 4 other elements that play a role in your mental process, but that you cannot control. You must learn to understand them and adapt to their ways. Infinite intelligence. The chapter on applied faith explains the power and importance of infinite intelligence. You cannot discipline it. Instead, you must discipline yourself to be ready to receive it and to act on its wisdom. The subconscious. You cannot directly control your subconscious. That's a big part of what its name implies. It acts only in response to stimulus from your emotions. But these are something you can control through self-discipline. When your emotions are positive and directed toward a definite purpose, your subconscious will be powerfully and similarly affected. However, it will respond just as quickly to negative emotions. It can't distinguish between the two. This is why your self-discipline must be applied to your emotions, so that your subconscious works for you, not against you. Telepathy. Telepathy is the broadcasting of your mental attitudes and thoughts to others. I'm not talking about such mundane uses as telling the babysitter when to put the kids to bed while you're out to the movies. I'm referring to the mental communication that develops between you and others committed to similar purposes. Your mastermind alliance is the best example of this power. As your alliance grows, each member will learn to anticipate the ideas of others and to connect immediately with their intense enthusiasm and inspiration. You can't control this process, but your self-discipline will aid you in cultivating the positive qualities which bring it into play. The senses, sight, sound, taste, smell, and touch, all may deceive you. They are capable only of perceiving the obvious. Much of what goes on in this world is not obvious, and the senses are easily fooled. While you can, to an extent, train your senses to serve you better, you must always evaluate the messages you receive from them by applying your reason. All four of these things must be a part of your mental processes. Your self-discipline will not give you direct authority over them, but it must make you more aware of their operations at all times. The power of the will. The greatest manifestation of self-discipline is in the strength of your will. As I have pointed out, your will is the supreme court of your mind. It may have the theoretical authority to order all your mental processes, but that authority depends upon constant, consistent, and ethical exercise. The power of a will trained by self-discipline is an irresistible force. The only limit on that power is the one that you impose on it by restricting or ignoring your self-discipline. History and folklore are full of stories of people whose wills alone triumphed over death and other incredible adversities. Who remembers the people whose weak wills kept them mired in mediocrity? Chapter 10. Think accurately. The raw power of thought. The focused power of accurate thought. The thinking process. Techniques for evaluation. The sources of your thought habits. 2 big mistakes. Controlled habits. Think of your mind as a piece of land. Through diligent, planned work, it can be cultivated into a beautiful and productive garden. Or it can lie fallow, overrun by weeds sprouting from seed carried by passing birds and the wind. Harvesting the bounty of your mind depends on careful effort and preparation by you, the gardener. This organization and its successful implementation are the result of accurate thinking. All plans, purposes, and achievements are created by thought. Your thoughts, you have already learned, are the only thing over which you have complete control. You can use them wisely or unwisely, but however you do it, your thoughts have power. The raw power of thought. An unknown paper hanger used thought powerfully. He sat moodily in a prison cell, contemplating the fact that life offered some people power and riches, while he was confined for a time. His very act of thought changed his life. The next the world heard of this man, he had written a book in which he frankly revealed the purposes of his mind and put the world on notice of his specific goal in life. Some people read the book and smiled tolerantly. Others didn't even bother, since they thought it was the work of a lunatic. A little more than a decade later, this madman had half of Europe under his heel, and the other half frightened out of its wits and fighting for dear life. His actions were setting the world on fire, but people in America went complacently about their business, believing that the fire would burn itself out. Adolf Hitler found the opportunity to use his power so destructively because so many other people failed to use theirs constructively. Although his thinking was not accurate in the sense that you will come to understand, it still had the power to cause death and suffering for countless millions of innocent people. His thoughts were abominations, but they had force. Applied accurate thinking is crucial to your desire for success. You should also recognize that exercising it is a moral duty you owe to every other person in the world. The focused power of accurate thought. Every story you have read in this book about a successful person proves the benefits, individual and social, of accurate thought, harnessed to a worthy, definite purpose. The rigor of Jonas Salk's thinking discovered the vaccine which prevents polio. George C. Marshall's careful planning revitalized Europe economically after the effects of Hitler's inhuman atrocities. George Bush's methodical assembly of the Desert Storm Alliance and the detailed planning of generals like Norman Schwarzkopf and Colin Powell put a stop to Saddam Hussein's Hitler-like ambitions. The quiet diligence that Mother Clara Hale put into building Harlem's Hale House now provides love and care to children ravaged by their parents' addiction to drugs and infection with AIDS. None of these great things could ever have happened without accurate thinking. You can never achieve anything great without learning to think accurately. The thinking process. Accurate thinking is based on two types of reasoning. One, induction. This is the act of reasoning from a part to a whole, from the particular to the general, from the individual to the universal. It is based on experience and experimentation and draws conclusions from them. Two, deduction. In this act of reasoning, specific conclusions are based on general logical assumptions. The two types of reasoning are very different, but they can work together. For instance, suppose that every time you throw a rock at a window, the window breaks, while the rock remains unchanged. The results of your repeated efforts cause you to reason inductively that the glass is fragile and that the rock is not. From this inductive reasoning, you can then proceed to deductive reasoning, which would suggest to you, among other things, that another non-fragile object, a baseball, for example, would also break the glass, or that the rock might also penetrate other fragile things like paper. Of course, your reasoning in this case would be limited, since you have not accounted for many variables. A fragile object could also break the window. Certainly a bottle could. And some fragile objects like cloth might simply collapse about a thrown rock instead of breaking. I am sure you can think of many other contingencies which would apply in this case. This example shows how easy it is to make false conclusions, and why accurate thinking is important, why your reasoning must be rigorous. You must examine the results of your reasoning consistently and look for flaws. You should apply this process just as stringently to the thinking of other people. To be an accurate thinker, you must make two important steps. One, separate facts from opinions, fictions, unproved hypotheses, and hearsay. Two, separate facts into two categories, important and unimportant. Everyone except accurate thinkers has an overabundance of opinions, and these are usually worthless. Many of them can be dangerous and destructive, especially when they occur in conjunction with personal initiative. Hitler is an obvious example. You cannot accept an opinion offered to you unless it is based on facts or sound hypotheses about the facts. You should not offer any opinions except on the same grounds. Accurate thinkers never act on freely offered opinions without giving them the closest scrutiny. They permit no one to do their thinking for them. They obtain facts, information, and counsel from others, but they retain the right to accept or reject it in whole or in part. Newspapers, gossip, and rumor are unreliable sources from which to procure facts, as the events they cover are so changeable, and these particular media are often not subject to verification. Remember the famous headline, "Dewey defeats Truman"? If you had believed it, you would probably still be wondering why General MacArthur lost the job. Wishes are often fathers to popularly accepted facts, since people naturally assume facts to be things that harmonize with their wishes. But these kinds of facts are so freely offered that you should remember that real facts generally have a price tag attached. the price of the painstaking labor needed to examine them for accuracy. For a few days not so long ago, our nation was in the grip of the rumor that hypodermic needles were appearing in Pepsi cans everywhere. There were reports of incidents from more than 20 states. On the basis of this fact, the price of Pepsi stock dropped dramatically, and many investors sold PepsiCo shares for much less than they had paid for them, even though the company's executives assured the country that this kind of tampering was highly unlikely. Accurate thinkers recognized the improbability of such a widespread tampering scheme and bought Pepsi stock. Then the FDA and the FBI declared every single report to be a hoax. Who benefited? The panicky sellers who had bought high and then prematurely sold a very solid company, or the accurate thinkers who bought the stock at a discount price? Techniques for evaluation. As an accurate thinker, you must scrutinize every bit of information you encounter. You have to realize that some things contain facts while being colored, modified, or exaggerated, either intentionally or carelessly. Any political campaign will demonstrate this point in glorious detail. You should apply some test to information you encounter. If you read a book, for example, you should ask questions like these. 1. Is the writer a recognized authority on the subject covered? 2. Did the writer have a motive in writing the book other than imparting accurate information? What is that motive? 3. Does the writer have a profit interest in the subject covered? 4. Is the writer a person of sound judgment or a fanatic? 5. Are there easily accessible sources to check and verify the writer's statements? And 6. Do the writer's statements harmonize with common sense and experience? Before you accept anyone's statement as facts, you must try to find the motive behind those statements. The motive can be completely honorable, but you must still be careful about accepting the statements of overzealous people who have a habit of letting their emotions run wild. Honor alone does not equal accuracy. You must rely upon your own judgment and be cautious no matter who is trying to influence you. If a statement does not seem reasonable or contradicts your experience, set it aside for further examination. When you ask others for facts or judgments, try not to disclose the answer you expect or your motives in asking, for people often alter their advice to fit what they assume is their listener's desire. This process may be innocent or duplicitous, but you should avoid it. Instead of asking, "Do you think it would be possible to send a man to Saturn?" or "How can I send a man to Saturn?" ask, "What do you know about the possibility of sending a man to Saturn?" Or even better, "What do you know about space travel?" This example may seem a little absurd, but if you substitute moon for Saturn in the above sentences, you'll see evidence of the power of accurate thinking. The sources of your thought habits. Your initial thought habits come from two sources, both of them hereditary. 1. Physical heredity. The nature and character of the generations that preceded you have some influence on your thought habits. You may be born with a predominantly rigid or free-floating thinking process, which many scientists now categorize as left or right brain. The first emphasizes details, the other broad schemes. Accurate thinking can modify, strengthen, and direct both qualities, since everyone possesses each, even though one is stronger than the other. Second, social heredity. Your environmental influences, education, and experience are all social stimuli. Thinking is most influenced by these things, and that is dangerous because it means that much of your thinking is inspired by others. However, you can take action to control and select these influences, such as reading this book. Most people embrace a religion, ally themselves politically, even select the car they drive, not because they have given thought to the subject, but because of the influences of those nearest them, friends, relatives, and acquaintances. As an accurate thinker, you will accept no political, religious, or other type of thought, regardless of its source, unless and until you have carefully analyzed it. Then you will accept or reject it of your own free will, and its value to you will be much greater. Robert Taylor, one-time governor of Tennessee, once asked a young man why he was a confirmed Democrat. Because the young man exclaimed, "I live in Tennessee, and my father and grandfather are Democrats. That's why." "Well," said the governor, "wouldn't you be in a bad fix if your father and grandfather had been horse thieves? I don't care what your party is, but you must select it, as you select everything, on the basis of accurate thought, not on the habits of others." Two big mistakes. Two opposite qualities are very prevalent in human nature, but each is a major roadblock to accurate thinking. Credulousness, the habit of believing on the basis of little or no evidence, is a major human fault, for it is fatal to accuracy in thinking. This fault in both his own people and those of the world certainly let Hitler build his influence to such horrendous levels. The mind of an accurate thinker is an eternal question mark. You must challenge everyone and everything that influences it. This does not imply a lack of faith. In fact, it is the greatest expression of respect for the Creator, since you recognize that your thoughts are the only thing over which you have been given complete control, and you embrace this blessing. The small minority of accurate thinkers has always been the hope of humanity. For they are the pioneers in whatever they do. They create business and industry, advance science and education, and inspire invention and religion. Emerson said it best: "Beware when the great God lets loose a thinker on this planet. Then all things are at risk. It is as when a conflagration has broken out in a great city, and no man knows what is safe or where it will end. There is not a piece of science but its flank may be turned tomorrow. There is not literary reputation, not the so-called eternal names of fame, that may not be revised and condemned. The very hopes of man, the thoughts of his heart, the religion of nations, the manners and morals of mankind, are all at the mercy of a new generalization. Generalization is always a new influx of the divinity into the mind, hence the thrill that attends it. When you are an accurate thinker, you are the master, not the slave of your emotions. You live among other people without giving them the power to control your thinking. You must always be on guard against the human tendency initially to reject an idea because it is unsound, but by close association with it in the form of family, friends, and co-workers, to endure it, then to embrace it as your own, forgetting its original source and your first evaluation of it. Your mind will absorb any idea that is repeatedly subjected to, whether good or bad, right or wrong. As an accurate thinker, you can make this trait work for you in the sense that whatever you think today becomes what you are tomorrow. This is the essence of the power of a definite major purpose and positive mental attitude. The other common weaknesses in most people's thinking is a tendency to disbelieve anything they do not understand. When the Wright brothers announced that they had built a machine that would fly and asked newspaper reporters to come to Kitty Hawk and see for themselves, no one would come. When Guglielmo Marconi revealed that he could send a message through the air without wires, some of his relatives had him sent to a psychiatrist for examination. They were convinced that he had lost his ability to reason. Contempt prior to examination is a trap that will limit your opportunity, applied faith, enthusiasm, and creativity. Do not confuse a suspension of belief in something unproved with a certainty that anything new is impossible. Accurate thinking is designed to help you understand new ideas or unusual facts, not to keep you from examining them. Controlled habits. I have repeatedly emphasized that your thoughts are the only thing over which you can exert complete control. Because your mind is so subject to the dominating influences in your environment, you must take control over those influences by developing beneficial mental habits. This process is called controlled habits. The process of controlling your habits is miraculous. It translates the power of thought into action. But if your habits are poor or bad, it can bring misery and failure. Your success depends on the strength and quality of your controlled habits. Think of your mind as photographic film. Film registers any object reflected on it. It does not select the object it records, and it has no control over the focus of the image or the length of the exposure it receives. You, the photographer, select the image, adjust the lens, manipulate the light and shutter speed. The quality of the picture that is taken depends on your skill in controlling all these elements. For your mental film, the subject of your composition is your definite major purpose. You frame it as you choose, illuminate it with the fire of your burning obsession, and expose your mind to it for the time that you determine. Few professional photographers take one shot of an important image. They do over the shot, adjusting all the elements of the process slightly so that a perfect image is finally recorded. Similarly, instead of a single photo session, you will work on your mental image on a daily basis, repeatedly exposing your brain to the image of your definite major purpose. This repeated photographing of your definite major purpose then becomes a habit, a controlled habit, since you have consciously decided upon the nature of your actions. The repeated reflection of the light of your burning obsession, which springs from your emotions, will also register this image upon your subconscious, which will work without your knowledge to bring the image to fruition by inspiring you through your imagination with ideas and plans for attaining your purpose. The manifestations of these ideas will not simply appear. Your subconscious cannot deposit a new car in your driveway or $10,000 in your bank account. Accurate thinking requires persistent action in applying these ideas and all the principles of success. This is why I have placed such strong emphasis on daily personal initiative in everything you do, for you must also develop the controlled habit of action. At first, action may require every bit of conscious mental control you can exercise, but every time you act, you strengthen that controlled habit so that the process becomes more ingrained. Your enthusiasm and your applied faith will also drive you. Both these qualities will increase as you make action a controlled habit. Work will no longer be a drudgery. It will become as pleasurable as eating when you are hungry. Strange things that will give you hope and courage will begin happening. People will begin to cooperate with you in a friendlier spirit and without your asking them to do so. Unexpected opportunities for attaining your definite major purpose will spring up around you as the result of your action. Your imagination will become keener and more alert. You will work longer with less fatigue. You will see the world in terms of hope and faith, because the controlled habit of action has alerted you to their possibility. With these changes will come improvements in every aspect of your life.